Picture this. You're at a family dinner, or maybe it's just a quiet afternoon phone call, and out of nowhere, one of your adult children says it. You've always loved them more. Everyone knows it. The room goes quiet, or the line goes silent. And you, after decades of getting up in the night, after years of showing up, after a lifetime of loving this person with everything you had, you freeze. Maybe you feel a hot wave of guilt. Maybe you feel a cold flash of anger. Maybe, if you're honest, you feel both at the same time. And the worst part? You don't know what to say. So you either say nothing, which they take as proof, or you say too much, and suddenly you're defending your entire history as a parent in a conversation you never agreed to have. I've been a psychologist for over 40 years. I have sat with hundreds of parents who have experienced this exact moment. And I want to tell you something right now, before we go any further. You are not guilty until proven innocent. And you do not have to accept that verdict. Today, I'm going to give you 6 specific, psychologically grounded responses for the moment one of your children says, "You love them more." These are not empty comebacks. They are tools built from decades of clinical experience that will help you stay calm, hold your ground, and redirect a conversation that has no business going where it's going. Stay with me through all 6. Because response number 6 is the one most parents never give themselves permission to say. And it might be the one that changes everything. Before we get to the responses, I want to spend a moment on why this particular accusation hits so hard. It is not just an insult. It is a direct strike at the core of your identity as a parent. Think about what you have built your life around. For most of you watching, being a good parent, a fair parent, a loving parent, was not just something you did. It was something you were. It shaped your decisions, your sacrifices, your daily choices for 30, 40, 50 years. So when one of your children reduces all of that to, "You love them more," it doesn't just sting. It lands like a verdict, like a judgment on your entire life's work. And here is something I need you to understand from a clinical perspective. The accusation triggers guilt, even when the guilt is completely unwarranted. Why? Because parents are wired to self-examine. That instinct, the one that made you a thoughtful parent in the first place, is the same one that makes you immediately wonder, "Did I? Was there truth in that?" Now, I want to be careful here, because there is an important distinction we need to make. Perceived favoritism and actual differential treatment are not the same thing. Almost every child at some point in their life feels like a sibling got more attention, more resources, more patience, more grace. The research on sibling dynamics is very clear on this. This perception is nearly universal. It exists in loving families. It exists in functional families. It does not mean it is true. And when your child brings this accusation into adulthood, especially in moments of stress, competition over inheritance, or caregiving decisions, what they are describing is their emotional experience, not necessarily reality. Here is the reframe I want you to carry with you. Your child isn't describing facts. They're describing feelings. And those are two very different things. Understanding that distinction is what will allow you to respond, rather than simply react. Before I give you the 6 responses that work, I need to spend a moment on the ones that don't. Because in this moment, the instinctive answers are almost always the wrong ones. First, "That's not true." I understand the impulse. But this response escalates instantly. It turns the conversation into a debate, and debates about love cannot be won. You will find yourself trading accusations, and the conversation will spiral. Second, "How could you say that after everything I've done?" This one feels righteous, but it opens a door you do not want to open. Because the moment you say it, you have implicitly invited them to present a list of grievances. And they will. And none of those grievances will feel fair to you. Avoid this one entirely. Third, silence. Just walking away. I know this feels like taking the high road. But in the heat of that moment, silence reads as guilt or as indifference. Either way, it gives your child the impression that they have said something powerful enough to render you speechless. That is not the message you want to send. Fourth, over-explaining past decisions. Well, when your brother needed the money, it was because, and then 20 minutes of context that no one asked for. This puts you on trial. And once you're on trial, you've already lost the framing of the conversation. After more than 4 decades of working with families, I can tell you this. The first words out of your mouth in this moment either close the door or open a wound. Let's make sure yours close it. Here are 6 responses that will do exactly that. The first response is this. I hear that you feel that way, and I want you to know, feelings aren't facts. Say it slowly. Say it kindly. And then, this is important. Say nothing else. What you are doing with this response is something therapists call emotional mirroring. You are acknowledging that your child has a feeling, a real feeling, that exists inside of them, without validating the accusation itself. You are holding space for their experience while refusing to accept their conclusion. The phrase "feelings aren't facts" is far more powerful than it sounds. When delivered with warmth, not sarcasm, not dismissal, it does something remarkable. It interrupts the emotional momentum of the accusation without creating a counterattack. Your child is expecting one of 2 things. Either you will collapse into guilt, or you will erupt into defensiveness. This response does neither. And that surprise, that quiet, steady refusal to play the game, is disarming in a way that argument never is. One practical note: the silence after this response is part of the technique. Do not rush to fill it. Let the words land. The second response is this. Can you give me one specific example? I'd genuinely like to understand. This one is elegant because it shifts the conversation from accusation to evidence without being combative. You are not denying anything. You are not dismissing anything. You are simply asking your child to be specific. And here is what I have observed in clinical practice over and over again. Most people who make this accusation cannot produce a concrete, recent, specific example. The accusation feels enormous and true from the inside, but when pressed to name a particular moment, a particular decision, a particular choice you made that proved you loved someone else more, most people go quiet. The question itself deflates the charge. Now, and this is critical, you must ask this with genuine curiosity. Not with crossed arms. Not with a tone that says, "Go ahead, I dare you." Ask it the way you would ask a patient, thoughtful question. Because that posture, that openness, is far more powerful than any combative tone could ever be. And if they do produce an example, then you say, "Thank you. That's worth talking about." Because that response models exactly the kind of maturity and emotional security that your child, at any age, still needs to see from you. The third response is one of the most clinically sound things you can say to a child who accuses you of favoritism. And many parents are afraid to say it because it sounds like an admission. It isn't. I don't love you the same. I love each of you differently. And differently doesn't mean less. Sit with that for a moment. The idea that parental love must be identical to be equal is one of the most persistent and damaging myths in family psychology. Children grow up believing that love is a finite resource, divided equally like slices of a pie. But that is not how love works. And it is certainly not how parenting works. Your daughter needed you differently than your son did. Your youngest needed different things at different times than your eldest did. You responded to those different needs in different ways, because that is what good parenting requires. So when you say, "I love each of you differently," you are not confessing to favoritism. You are describing reality. You are describing a love that was individualized, not rationed. And that is a far more sophisticated and accurate portrait of what you actually gave them. The statement lands because it is honest, and because it reframes the entire premise of the accusation. Sameness is not the measure of love. Depth is. The fourth response requires a little preparation, but it is worth it. I've shown up for you in ways I never had to for them. Let me remind you of a few. Notice what this is not. It is not a list of grievances. It is not a defensive catalog of everything you've ever done. It is a witness statement, and the difference matters enormously. You are not on trial. You are a witness to your own love story. Think of 2 or 3 specific moments: the time you drove 3 hours in the middle of the night, the months you helped financially when things fell apart, the phone calls during the hard season of their marriage, or their health scare, or their career crisis, the times you chose them specifically in ways that no one else saw or counted. Bring 1 or 2 of those moments into the room. Keep it brief. This is not a rebuttal. It is an anchor. You are grounding the conversation in something real and specific. And you are reminding your child, gently but clearly, that your love for them has a history. A history they are choosing in this moment not to see. The goal is not to win. The goal is to remind them of what is true. The fifth response elevates the conversation from accusation to insight. This isn't the first time this has come up. I think there's something deeper here we need to talk about. This response does something the others don't. It signals that you see the pattern. And that changes the power dynamic of the conversation entirely. When you name a pattern, you demonstrate emotional intelligence. You demonstrate that you are not rattled by the accusation, you are curious about it. And curiosity is a form of authority. Here is something I want you to understand from a clinical perspective. In many cases, the accusation of favoritism is what we call a displacement. Your child is not actually in pain about you loving their sibling more. They are in pain about something else entirely, a disappointment in their own life, a feeling of failure, unresolved grief, a sense that the world has not given them what they deserved. And you, the parent, the most constant, most trusted figure in their emotional world, become the target. Not because you deserve it, but because you are safe. Because they know, somewhere deep down, that you will still be there after they say it. That doesn't make it acceptable, but it does make it understandable. When you name the pattern and invite a deeper conversation, you are offering your child something more valuable than a defense. You are offering them a way through. And now, response number 6. This is the one I told you about at the beginning. The one most parents never give themselves permission to say. I love you, and I won't accept being spoken to as though I owe you an apology for loving your sibling. That is a complete sentence, and it requires nothing after it. Now, I want to be clear about when to use this one. Not every accusation calls for this response. If this is the first time the subject has come up, start with responses 1 through 5. But if this is a recurring pattern, if you have been subjected to this accusation repeatedly, or if it was delivered publicly, or if it is being used as leverage to extract something from you, then this response is not just appropriate. It is necessary. Notice that it begins with love. I love you. That is not rhetorical padding. That is the foundation. You are making clear that what follows comes from a place of love, not rejection, not coldness, not retaliation. And then you name what is unacceptable. Parents who hold this kind of boundary are not cold parents. They are not distant parents. They are parents who understand something profound, that modeling self-respect is one of the most loving things you can do for an adult child, because it shows them that love and dignity can coexist, that being loved does not mean you can be spoken to any way someone chooses. The temporary discomfort of holding this boundary is far less damaging to your relationship and to your child's emotional development than the long-term cost of never holding it. Say it with love. Say it clearly. And then let it stand. After you use one of these responses, something will happen. and I want to prepare you for the two most common outcomes. The first, your child escalates. They get louder, or angrier, or they bring in other grievances. If this happens, do not match their energy. You can say, "I'm not going to continue this conversation right now. I'd like to talk when we've both had time to think." And then follow through on that. Calmly, without drama. The second, your child goes quiet. They may feel called out. They may feel embarrassed. They may withdraw temporarily. This is uncomfortable, but it is often a sign that the response landed. Give them space. Do not circle back to apologize for holding your ground. That last point is worth repeating. Do not apologize for holding your ground. Now, here is the honest, clinical caveat I offer every parent who sits across from me. After the conversation is over and you are alone, it is worth asking yourself one quiet question. Is there any part of what they said that has truth in it? Not because you owe them an apology, but because self-examination is what good parents do. If you reflect privately and find something, a period of time when one child genuinely did receive more, you can address that. Privately. On your own terms. Not under the pressure of accusation. There is a critical distinction here, and I want you to hear it clearly. Self-examination is healthy. Guilt-driven appeasement is harmful. You can be honest with yourself without surrendering your dignity. You can acknowledge complexity without accepting a false verdict. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. Let me bring you back to where we started. That moment, when your child looks at you and says, "You've always loved them more." It is one of the most destabilizing things a parent can hear. I know that. I have watched it happen. I have watched good, loving, devoted parents be brought to the edge of tears by those 5 words. But here is what I also know, after more than 40 years of sitting with families. The fact that your child can accuse you of loving someone else more is itself proof that love was never the problem. Children who are unloved don't accuse their parents of misdirecting love. They know absence. They know indifference. What your child is expressing, however painful, however unfair it feels, is the language of a person who was loved, who wanted more of it, and who hasn't yet found the words to say that without making it an accusation. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't mean you have to absorb it silently. But it does mean that the love you gave was real. It was enough. It was more than enough. The question was never whether you loved them. The question, the one only you can answer, is whether you love yourself enough to say so. Use these 6 responses, not as weapons, as mirrors, as the calm, clear, loving voice of a parent who has nothing to prove and everything to offer. If this video helped you today, please take a moment to like it and subscribe to Strong Elderly Life. We are here every week with honest, grounded conversations about the real emotional landscape of life after 60 because you deserve more than platitudes. And leave me a comment below. I read every single one. Tell me, which of these 6 responses felt most like you? I'll see you in the next one.